Have we met already? It's Friday night at around 8:45 p.m. The little one's in bed, and I'm chilling with some friends online, gaming. There's a loud bang and I'm instantly freaking out, due to having my home, my safe place, invaded by some creeper twice in the past 3 months. I turn the volume on my computer down, trying my best to come up with excuses. Oh, it was the neighbors doing something. Who in their right minds would try to break into my house when they can see that I'm awake? Front outdoor light on, lounge light on, it's quiet for a while, so I return to playing the game and talking to my friends. That's when I hear rustling. I think it's coming from the game, despite the volume being super low. But to be on the safe side, I turned the sound on the computer off completely. The rustling's still there. At this point, I think it might be that annoying pest possum. The banging could have been it jumping onto the garage roof, and now it was snuffling around outside the leaves, searching for some food. As I said earlier, who would try to trespass when they could clearly see someone was home? If they did trespass, why would they be doing so loudly? I want to say it put me at ease, but it didn't. Fast forward half an hour and the noises have stopped, and my cat's begging me to be let outside. Little Beastard. I love him, really. I hate opening doors/curtains/windows at night. Paranoia at its finest. But tonight I had a reason to be paranoid, at least. I kept the chain lock on the door and let the fat fuzzball squeeze out, and had a bit of a peek through the crack, seeing if anything was amiss on my front lawn. Nothing out of the ordinary, so I lock the door and head back to the lounge. 5 minutes later, someone tries the door handle. Finding it locked, I hear a laugh, and they start scratching on the glass as I frantically grab my phone and call the police. Whoever it was had left by the time they answered the phone, and police couldn't find evidence that anyone had been on the property. They did a sweep of the neighborhood, but couldn't find anyone on the streets. Either, whoever you are, I'd say let's not meet, but I'm pretty sure you're the same person who came the other 2 times. And I'm fairly certain that that person is my ex. So, Mr. X. If it is you, smile for the cameras next time you come around. They just arrived in my mailbox. Never take powdered envelopes from strangers. The other day at work we were basically told to look out for ourselves and others, wait for a security guard, etc. Now this was a normal thing for the suburb we live in, but it was still a bit strange. My friend from Night Phil told me why. Their friend and co-worker finished up at around 12 that morning and was approached by this guy when he was at his car. The guy looked pretty normal, track keys and all, and gave him an envelope claiming there were free Fringe tickets inside. Side note for clarification, Fringe is an art festival, like music and comedy and dancing etc. in the CBD. There was some sort of white powder on the ticket, but he just assumed it was cocaine or something, again not uncommon in this area, so just grabbed it. Planning to throw it out later because it was probably counterfeit. Not wanting to spark any conflict, it's unpredictable around here, especially at 12 a.m. His mates came out around 12:15 to see him with something like burns on his hands, where he touched the powder, and felt like he was burning on the inside and couldn't breathe properly. Luckily he was still conscious and told them to take him to the hospital, which luckily wasn't that far away. They got there and practically everyone that came into contact with him felt like they were burning under their skin. And were all having breathing difficulties within minutes. They had to call hazmat fireys and everyone was decontaminated. Luckily everyone is okay. Surgical zombie smoke break. I have a lot of weird encounters outside my office on my smoke breaks, but I think this one takes the cake, even with how anticlimactic it was. Today I was sitting on the wall outside my building smoking and messing around on my phone. I had probably been sitting there for about 2 minutes without looking up when I finally do and notice a guy on the corner about 20 feet away staring intently at me. He's hunched over facing me in the classic zombie pose, wearing a large coat, a surgical mask and gloves. I didn't know how long he'd been standing there, but it was daytime and the area is relatively populated, so despite being the only people on the street, I wasn't too worried. I went back to looking at my phone, but kept discreetly glancing in his direction to see if he was still there. He didn't move or stop looking at me for probably another minute and a half, just sunken shoulders with his unblinking eyes pointed directly at me over his mask. Finally I notice an older man walking towards us and my cigarette is almost finished, so I assume worst comes to worst, this guy will be near if anything happens. I glance back at my phone and hear what I assume are the older man's footsteps approaching. Before I have a chance to look up, the surgical zombie is sitting within an inch of me on the wall. I'm a polite girl, so I give him a vague smile while my inner self and personal space are screaming at me to get up and leave. He asks me for a cigarette, so I give him one and he just continues to sit there with it unlit. I can't fight my manners, so I ask him if he needs a light and he gives me a gloved double thumbs up and stares at me. I ask him if that meant he had one, to which he responds with another double thumbs up. I assumed that was him saying he did, so I turn back to my phone planning on taking one more drag before getting up to leave. He then says yes, I need one, so I give him my lighter. He hands it back and I put my smoke out and stand up. He then begins laughing, like full belly laughing. I didn't really know how to respond, so I tell him to have a nice day and walk into my building. To be honest, I've never really had a fear of people, and I can't say this is the first time I've had someone has done something like this, but the mask and gloves really added to the absurdity of the situation. A day of play leads to kidnapping. It was a very long time ago, back in 1973. I know it was summer, I was 6, and we were living on Monica Lane in Madison, Wisconsin. Thing is, I sort of recalled it but never put 2 and 2 together until a few months ago when I was talking to my mom, who went into great detail. I was a very gregarious child, outgoing, extroverted, friends with anyone. It was at the time a middle-class neighborhood, and 3 houses down from ours, on the same side of the street, was a huge park. My mom was a nurse and my dad was a salesman, but mom worked second shift at Meritor, while my dad worked days. I rarely had a babysitter, only if they went out for dinner or a movie. But they did go out often and there were always older kids in the neighborhood to babysit. One sitter who I really liked lived a few blocks or so away, and down the street a little bit. Vicky had babysat a few times before that and it was pretty uneventful. She'd play games with me, and do my hair, play dress up, pretty basic stuff. So anyhow, one day I had gone with friends down to the park. I remember there was a ball field at the time, and a sandlot next to the field. My friends wanted to play on the monkey bars, but I wanted to play in the sand. I looked at the sandbox and my babysitter Vicky was standing there. I told my friends I was going down to the sandbox and ran off. We played in the sand, building a castle, and then she asks me if I wanted to go get something cold to drink. It was stifling hot, and I of course said yes. So she takes my hand and we start walking to her place. She starts telling me about her puppies and asking if I want to play with them. Of course I get giddy and now can't wait to get to her house. This was where my memory had stopped, and after my mom told me what happened, the rest of it flooded back. My mother just happened to be talking to my sister and I about some of the places we lived, and we got to Monica Lane. I told her I remembered the park and how big it seemed, and she asks me if I remember being kidnapped. I immediately thought she was kidding, and then the look on her face told me otherwise. She said it was around 5 in the afternoon and one of my friends had come to the door to ask me to come back outside, sure that I had gotten bored and walked back home. When my mom checked the house, she realized I wasn't there and, 7 months pregnant with my sister, sprints to the park, screaming my name. After asking several kids if they'd seen me with no clue, she went to the ball field and asked the older boys if they'd seen me. One of the boys, she guessed around 14, said that he'd seen a younger woman playing with a girl that fit my description in the sand and walk off in a general direction, and that was all he knew. My mom ran across the street to one of the houses and asked to use their phone and called the police. By the time the police got there, my dad had come home and some of the neighbors were trying to help my mom, so there's this search party out looking for me, screaming my name and knocking on doors. The police had gone back to the park to ask the boys if they knew who had been with me and if they knew who she was. Between the boys and the neighbors, they had deduced who it was that had led me off, but I have no idea how. Honestly, the police and the entourage go to her home. She lived with her parents but they weren't home, and knock on the door. She came to the door and told them she hadn't seen me, and that she'd been home all day. The police asked to come in and for some reason she said okay. They went through the house, and went to the basement and found me. That's what my mom knew, and then I remembered. It was literally like a floodgate had opened and I started crying, At 6 you sort of trust everyone, and she'd been in our home. I never got a bad feeling from her and my parents didn't, either. But when we walked into her house I remember that cold, holy FCK feeling washing over me and getting very worried. I remember starting to cry and saying I wanted to go home, over and over. She takes me into her kitchen and gets me a glass of water and a tissue. I hear dogs barking, and next to the kitchen is an open stairway that goes down and where the barking was coming from. She starts trying to cajole me into going downstairs, telling me there's all sorts of toys and games. I reluctantly agree and she grabs my hand to head down the stairs. The dogs are going nuttier and I start screaming. At this point Vicky is getting F-king bizarre. She's screaming at me to shut the FCK up. If you don't shut up I will throw you in the cage with the dogs and they will eat you. Shut up. Dragging me down the stairs and still screaming, I was scared out of my mind. I remember crying so hard I was hyperventilating, and I am screaming so hard I'm not making sounds. Vicky then flips a switch and starts being syrupy sweet, trying to calm me down. She tells me that she was just playing a game and tells me she wants to play hide and seek. She must have been relatively skilled at calming me down because the next thing I know, I hear knocking on the door upstairs and I wasn't crying. The houses were all the same sort of tract houses that Sears used to sell, not huge but not small, but you could hear everything at any spot in the house. I keep hearing the knocking and she tells me that it's her friends. They're coming to play hide and seek. She convinced me to let her put a piece of masking tape over my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, and lifted me into this big wooden box next to the kennel. She put a big pile of blankets over me, and told me to be really quiet so they didn't find me. The whole time the dogs were going batch-t, but when she calmed me down, they calmed down, too. They still looked incredibly mean but they were no longer frothing at the mouth, and only slightly growling. Until the knocking started, I remember scrunching in there, confused. Still scared and convinced that the dogs were going to get out and eat me. I was crying again and hyperventilating. I remember taking the tape off my mouth because I couldn't breathe, but remembered I needed to be quiet because I was afraid what she'd do if I screamed. I laid in that smelly box next to a big bag of dog food, sweating to hell, tears rolling down my face. I sort of pushed the blankets to the side but only enough so that I could pull them back over me when someone came. I recall thinking about my dad and wondering if he'd come find me. All of a sudden I hear what sounds like adults yelling my name. They come down the stairs and the dogs are going batch-t again. Over and over men are yelling my name and then I hear a man say, "If you don't shut those F-king dogs up I will." I was in a large storage box, like a carpenter's toolbox type of thing, with tape hanging off my mouth, when they opened the lid. I remember a very nice man asking me my name and if I was okay. I don't remember answering him in anything other than screams and tears and grabbing his neck so hard my dad had to practically pry me off of him. I remember my parents taking me to the hospital to be checked out and that's all I really remember. Mom said that Vicky was found guilty of attempted kidnapping, and last she knew was in prison but couldn't remember when the last time was she had heard anything. We moved from the area shortly thereafter, and I haven't been back since. I do know that Mom said that her parents were odd but that they didn't know them. She had met Vicky from neighbors that had used her as a babysitter, and had never heard of anything bad and that I always seemed happy with her. She lived in the general neighborhood but it would have been 2 blocks over and 1 block down. Mom said they never picked her up, she always walked over. When they'd get home they'd drive her home but never noticed anything out of the ordinary. Mom and Dad had only met her parents when they came to the door to ask for forgiveness, that Vicky hadn't meant to do anything bad, and was a good girl. Mom said my dad picked up her dad by the shirt and told him that if they ever came on our property again, he'd kill them. I remember her name and sort of what she looked like, but would have no idea if she walked up to me who she is.